Namaskar, this is Dada Rainjitananda. Welcome to this webinar. We are continuing our series on Tantra, discovering the roots of Tantra. This is the second webinar. I'm going to talk about the history and an overview of Tantra. And let's go for it. And just a little bit about the webinar we explained last time, but always good to remind. I will do this presentation with the slides and the webcam. You can, there is a line in between the slides and the webcam, and so you can make one bigger and smaller as you prefer. Then for questions, there is a questions window in your control panel. So you can write your questions, you can write them during the presentation. I make an effort to see if some questions come, but sometimes I may overlook them, but surely by the end of the webinar or even later, you get a reply for your questions, so you can type them. And that's it for the technical part. Now let's go through the presentation. So what I'm going to talk today, I will talk a little bit about Shiva and his Tantra. I will talk about Tantra in India and Tantra and Indo-Aryan civilization. I will also talk about Krsna, about a little bit about Buddhist, Jain, and Hindu Tantra, and about Tantra and Taoism, a brief overview of Tantra. So the beginning, usually when we talk about anything, we always want to know when did it start. Like we talk about the history of the United States and we say, oh, it was discovered on this date by this individual. But now we kind of start seeing history in a different way. That was not really the start. There was already something happening before. And here, with Tantra is similar. When did it really start? According to the definition of Tantra that we'll be presenting, Tantra started when human beings first began to think about something greater. So when we as human beings started thinking, there is something greater, how can I connect to it? So let's say that is the beginning of Tantra. But as per the knowledge of today and the way people see history, the oldest thing they have about Tantra is what is called the Pashupati seal. And this is in the picture there. This Pashupati seal was uncovered in 1928-29 in an area of Pakistan called Mohenjo-Daro. And there is an excavation there. It's a kind of a site, archaeological site in Pakistan. They think that it is dated like 2000 BC or 2350 BC. That's what the scientists are thinking. And there are people who think that this Pashupati seal is actually representing Shiva. Shiva was called Pashupati. Pashu means animals and Pati means the Lord. Shiva was like the Lord of animals. So the Lord of animals, that's why in the seal, it shows a figure sitting in a position that one can say is a yogic position, a meditation pose, and around there are figures of animals. So that's why the name comes Pashupati, and that's why there is a number of people that think this is Shiva. Now let's get back to what is Tantra. Because I mentioned that idea that Tantra really started when people started thinking that there is some other entity, some greater entity. Tantra is that process that transforms us. It brings us from, let's say, a stage that we are more connected to the animal world. Let's say we are living more to eat and sleep and to reproduce and experiencing a lot of fear. So we are kind of very close to animal. So Tantra will bring us up, let's say, to a feeling of more love, more compassion, let's say to a human level. And it takes us even beyond, it takes us to the level of divinity, in where we establish a connection, a direct connection with that greater entity, that we can say that cosmic consciousness, that supreme consciousness. So that's Tantra, this process of transformation. So Shiva actually was a living being, a human being in this planet about 7,000 years ago, was a great yogi, was a great master. He was born in an environment that there was already Tantra. There were practices of Tantra already in Shiva's time. So when he came, it's not that at that time Tantra started, because he was already born in an environment of Tantra. But Tantra was not systematized. It was a bunch of practices, but not very systematized. And really spiritual practice is Tantra. So, but that practice has to be systematized. So Shiva, we'll just go back one slide here. Shiva was one who gave this system. We'll talk more about Shiva in a moment. Getting back to that idea that when people started searching for this greater entity, Tantra started, it means that any practice existing today, invented by anyone, great master in the past, all these practices are considered part of Tantra. So Tantra kind of embraces all this. And that's why from the title you see that there is Tantra in Buddhism, there is Tantra in Jainism, there is Tantra in Hinduism, there is Tantra in Taoism. Whatever is kind of a deep spiritual practice is classified within the scope of Tantra. So Tantra is very embracing, very universal. It talks about expansion. Spirituality means expansion. Let's say my mind. What I think makes me. So I am what I think. If I think very small, I am very limited. I make myself limited. If I expand my mind in the sense of understanding more, perceiving more, that means I'm making a tantric effort. I'm expanding my mind. So Tantra is this expansion. At the same time, it is a liberation from the bondage of staticity. What is this staticity? we can see it in ourselves in certain situations. For example, suppose I'm attending a lecture or a conference and I want to ask something. So I'm going to ask it, but at that moment, maybe because of some fear or shyness, I hesitate and I don't ask. So I want to express, but I do not. That's a bondage. And that bondage is created by this static force. So many times in our life, we want to do something, we want to express something, but there is some force that keeps us from doing that, keeps us from expressing ourselves, keeps us from becoming what we really want to become. So that's staticity. Tantra is also the practice that liberates us from this staticity, therefore giving us the potentiality to express our talents and our capacities. So what is a tantrika? One who practices Tantra. An individual. It doesn't matter what is the caste or what you believe in or what race you are, what's your social status or anything. What matters is that within there is an aspiration and to attain something greater, to expand the mind. And not only that the aspiration is there, but we are also doing something towards it. Because we like to say that Tantra is something practical, not only theoretical. So there can be the theory, but we should be doing something practical. We should be coming out and doing something. So that is a Tantrika. So Tantra is not a religion, it's not a ism in the sense of like a dogma or like a humanism or even more limited isms. It's the fundamental spiritual science. Science to attain spiritual realization. That's why it permeates all religions. In all religions, there is a goal to attain something greater. So therefore, Tantra is everywhere in all these religions. Some have more of Tantra, some have less, but it permeates all religions. We can say that where there is spiritual practice, a practice to attain something greater, someone greater, that is Tantra. But where people are just wanting something from their practice, like they want wealth, they want name and fame, they want objects, they want material things, there is no Tantra there. It is kind of pseudo-religious practices. But the real desire to attain the great, to attain the divine, then there will be Tantra. It is the science of sadhana. Sadhana is a Sanskrit word for spiritual practice or spiritual effort. And how Tantra works means you get an instruction. Now, when we get an instruction, we have to practice. And we have to persevere in the practice. If we do that, then we are becoming ready to get a new instruction, further instruction, to go deeper. It's not that we want instructions to accumulate, that I know this, I know that, and I know that. These instructions are to be practiced so that you get ready for the next instruction. And then you practice the next one, you are ready for the next one. So it's a gradual process. So Shiva Tantra, I mentioned a little bit about Shiva just a few moments ago. Shiva gave the system of practices of Tantra about 7,000 years ago. As I mentioned, it's not that he came up with it from nowhere. He kind of saw everything that was happening and he brought it into a systematized way. You know, when we do something with a system, we can be successful. But if we do it kind of in unsystematic way, rarely will be successful. It could happen, but it's very rare. But if we really have a system and we do things in a systematic way, we have more chance of being successful in what we do. And that can be anything in life. So Shiva was born in that environment of Tantra. He systematized all the practice. He gave the science of mantra, the science of breathing, you know, pranayama is a very special technique of yoga. He gave that science. He also had a lot of social influence. He wanted to unify that divided society of those days. You know, people were divided in small clans, and he wanted to bring them together. He also gave the science of dance. That's why he is also called Nataraja. The Raja means the Lord, Nataraja, Lord of dance. So he also gave dance. It was not a systematic practice. People were moving, but they didn't have a proper system of dance. Another very incredible thing that Shiva gave is the musical scale, the notes. And we nowadays, we are doing music using the notes. Maybe we don't think who invented them. No? And another interesting thing, Shiva introduced the system of marriage. That primitive society, let's say 7,000 years ago, they didn't have this idea of a marriage partnership. It means people really knew the mothers of the kids, but the father was not really taking responsibility, and sometimes people did not even know exactly who the father was. So this marriage system was very important. So creating the family, and that was very important for society. And Shiva was actually a tantric guru. He gave all these practices that his disciples started doing, and they developed themselves a lot as human beings. Let's say that he was one of the most important tantric masters in the history of Tantra. All right, that much about Shiva. But the thing is that even in the days of Shiva, it's like 7,000 years ago, Aryans, the Aryans were already invading India. And so there was this big confrontation between the Aryans and the locals. And that's the time Shiva was born. So Shiva kind of made an effort also to bring these two populations into more peaceful coexistence, and let's say that to pacify that environment. And the Aryans, they were bringing with them the Vedas. And India, in those days, the local population, they were practicing Tantra. So now there was this kind of meeting of Veda and Tantra. And that was already happening in the time of Shiva. Okay, let me pause here, since I'm talking a lot about Shiva. Let me ask you a question here. let me see how it is for you, how much you know of Shiva, and okay, I give you a few moments more so more people can vote. We are over 70%, so that's good. About 80% of you have voted. Okay, I think it's okay. I can close the poll now. Let me close it. Let's see the results. Okay, I was talking about Shiva. So 40% of you have heard of Shiva, but as a Hindu god. And 60% of you have heard of Shiva as a great yogi who lived on this planet. And it seems all of you heard about Shiva, so nobody said no. Great, let me close this one. Now, if you go to India, most people in India, they think of Shiva more as a god. Not so many people think of Shiva as somebody like a human being who walked on this planet and there was a great master like that. Few people. No. Okay, so let me continue here on the Tantra and Indo-Aryan civilization. The thing is that these Aryans, they came to India, they brought some of the Vedas, and other Vedas were written in India. But like the Rig Veda, which is the oldest one, is basically non-Indian. It was brought by the Aryans. The other one, the Yajur Veda, which is a little bit newer, it was also when the Aryans were migrating to India via Iran, Afghanistan, they were writing it. So and then it got a little bit influence also from Tantra. So the Brahmavada, which is kind of the knowledge of Brahma, the knowledge of the Supreme Consciousness, of this second, the Yajur Veda, is a little bit deeper, more clear than the Rig Veda. So it means when they were getting more influence of Tantra, they were kind of understanding more or going deeper in the thought of this supreme entity. Then the further Veda, which is the Atharva Veda, was composed in India already, and there is much more influence of Tantra. And so even one can say that there is more influence of Tantra than the Veda in this Atharva Veda. So the Aryans first, they were coming from the north, so they settled in Kashmir. You know, if you go to Kashmir today, you see even the skin of the population there is much lighter in color than if you go more south into India. So they got more influence from the Aryans. And they settled there, so there is, in the mix of the Veda and Tantra, they created this Kashmir school of Tantra, which is quite well known. And but one thing is that the Aryans, they didn't have a script. So the Vedas were memorized. They used to memorize the Vedas, and not it was not written down. So even later on, because in the beginning the Vedas were something memorized and not written down, there was a group of, let's say, scholars know of the Vedas, that they said that Vedas should not be written, should just be memorized. But eventually, to avoid the loss of the knowledge, they had no choice but to write it. They first learned the script from the Dravidians in the, like when in Pakistan. Actually, Pakistan was India, so just in recent history it was separated, Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, but it used to be only one. So there is this Mohenjo-daro area in Pakistan where they did all the excavations. They found this ancient civilization, also the Harappa civilization. And these civilizations were from the Dravidians, which is the kind of original people of India. So the Aryans, they conquered North India, so they learned a lot from the locals, and including the script. They did have more kind of capacity to fight and more weapons and like that. So they managed to dominate the locals, make them slaves, but they ended up absorbing them in their system, but they just classified them as the lowest possible caste. So they, like the very stratified society, and the lowest people were the locals. But they tried not to mix with the locals, but there was no way. Plus, the locals had a strong culture also. So there was a lot of mixing influence. And modern India today, people are very mixed. You will find so many different types of people. And that was from all this migration. And there were the Mongolian race also, and the Dravidians. So all these races mixed, we'll find the modern Indian society. All right, so we stopped there on talking about this Indo-Aryan civilization. The idea here is that what we see today is a mixture of races and a mixture of the Veda and the Tantra. And now we see that in India, and that permeates also the religion's expressions in India. I talked about Shiva, I talked about all these historic invasion of the Aryans in India and how it happened and how it influenced the society. Now, let's say we calculate Shiva about 7,000 years ago. Then about, let's say, 3,500 years ago, there was Krsna, another great yogi. Krsna gave a lot to yoga. He gave the concept of karma yoga, jnana yoga, bhakti yoga, and you can read the Bhagavad Gita, the Mahabharata, and you will be able to know a lot about Krsna. And Krsna was also a great master, a great tantric master that lived on this planet many years ago. So I'm just starting a little bit about Krsna. So let me ask you a question similar to what I asked about Shiva. Let me ask you about Krsna. Okay, I'm getting over 70%. I just wait a moment. Let's see if we get a few more people voting. Yes, okay. I think most of you have voted. Let me close and share this with you. Okay, kind of similar to answers I got about Shiva. 30% of you think or have heard of Krishna as a Hindu god, and 70% as a great guru who lived on this planet also. All right, let's close this part here. And let's continue talking about Krishna. So in what we get today, because a lot of history, spiritual history gets lost, but a lot gets preserved also, many stories about Krishna. But what happens is that myth mixes with history. And in the end, we cannot know what is just mythological and what is reality. But what I can say is that Krishna was in this planet, was living here, giving his teachings. And in that time, there was the Mahabharata. And the Mahabharata was this great war. And you can read the Mahabharata, it's very interesting. Maybe I just ask you a question. How many of you have read the Mahabharata? You can write your answer on the question window there. Just type it as if it's a question. My question is, how many of you have read the Mahabharata? So most of the questions, the answer so far has been no. Excuse me. Actually, I'm in Costa Rica now. And weather here has been changing a lot. So, all right. So, okay, most of you had said no. Most of you had said no. And somebody said, has read part of it. Okay, just so I can picture it. This Mahabharata there is also a movie which is quite interesting, made by, I think, a British director. So he uses a lot of actors from different races. Quite an interesting movie about the Mahabharata. Actually, this Mahabharata, I just tell about it in short. It's an epic, one of the most famous in India, and it pictures a war. In this war, there are 5 brothers. They are called the 5 Pandavas. So these 5 brothers, they are fighting against their cousins. And in this epic, it says there are 100 of them, 100 of cousins fighting against these other 5. Okay, so 5 brothers and another 100 brothers, and they are fighting amongst themselves. And the Mahabharata goes on describing the battle and the various commanders and their characteristics and their personality, and how the fight goes on and how different people are dying and others are surviving like this. Now, the thing is that while, just a moment, while most people see it just like that, there is a very deep symbolism behind it, hidden within this war. Because actually these 5 Pandavas, these 5 brothers, represent the 5 chakras in the human body. You know, the yogic chakras, we have 5 chakras in the body. Then we have a chakra, a main chakra in between the eyebrows, and a 7th chakra on the top of the head. So making the 7, let's say, basic chakras that we see in yoga, like that. So the 5 chakras, first chakras, are represented by these 5 Pandavas. And these 100 enemies, you know, the 100 enemies are actually the 100 mental, I will call it, propensities that we have. Let's say fear is a mental propensity, or indifference is a mental propensity, or shyness is a mental propensity. And like this, according to yoga, there are 100. And we, in our life, we are fighting these mental things, you know, like we are fighting fear, we are fighting shyness, we are encouraging hope. So we are kind of in a fight with these 100 mental propensities, and how we fight them by balancing and developing and strengthening our chakras. So that war is happening within us. And so this Mahabharata, within this Mahabharata, there is this symbolism that most people don't capture it, but that is how we view it from the tantric point of view, you know, the tantric standpoint. All right. So, let me see. Okay, right. Now, Krishna is also famous for playing the flute. While maybe, and we hear many histories that Krishna used to play the flute like that, there is also symbolism behind it. The flute is the sound that when this energy, spiritual energy within us is awakened, what this energy is called Kundalini, when it's awakened, we may hear a sound which is very similar to a flute. So then that is the Krishna flute in the deeper mystical interpretation. So therefore, all these stories we hear about Krishna and this, we can also understand it from the spiritual, mystical, symbolic representation that it carries. All right, so that was a little bit about Krishna. And Krishna was also a tantric guru. He guided his most famous disciples are the Pandavas, but he was the guru of many people on that historical time. And he gave a lot of knowledge, than Bhakti Yoga and Jnana Yoga and Karma Yoga that we mentioned just a moment ago. All right. Okay, so that was about Krishna, just giving you kind of a overview and how Tantra connects with these famous masters or gurus that we hear about. So let's see about the Buddhism, Jainism, Hinduism. I mentioned before that every spiritual practice in every religion comes within the scope of Tantra. So we find also tantric practice in Buddhism, tantric practice in Jainism, in Hinduism. And we also find that when those teachers came, Buddha and Mahavir, which was the Jain teacher, their teachings also kind of influenced the practice of Tantra in those days. And there was kind of a mixture. In the same way that there was this mixture with the Vedas, there was also this mixture of Tantra and Jainism and Buddhism. So some tantric practices were kind of incorporated into Buddhism, into Jainism, into Hinduism. So Tantra remained, even Buddhism was dominating India those days, Tantra remained in a subterranean flow. People continued practicing Tantra, maybe adapting it a little bit to the Buddhist way and also using Buddhist terms, but Tantra remained. For example, this symbol of this Jain symbol with the hand like this. The hand like this is means like, and it's used. This mudra is used for blessing. So Shiva used this, and we can see that it also used by other masters, like Buddha also used, and also Mahavir used. So it's all like a tantric heritage. In the Buddhist era, Buddhism came in a time where spirituality was kind of going down because of many dogmas in India those days. So Buddhism gave a lot of speed and new dynamism to the society. While the Vedic era, it was kind of going down. When Buddhists came, it gave speed to the spiritual practice. And it created long period of speed. And this Buddhism spread all over Southeast Asia, and it went so many countries. We do find that today in India, Buddhism, you don't find it so much. And there is a historical reason for that, because on those days, different philosophers or proponents of different philosophies, they used to have debates. And there was a famous debate between the Buddhists' main, let's say, monks, the most knowledgeable, and Shankaracharya, which was more on the representing Hinduism. So in this debate, Shankaracharya was more capable than those who were representing the Buddhists. So he kind of won the debate. And because he won, Buddhism lost a lot in India. And plus Buddhism was also kind of financed by the kings, and when they lost that source, they also went down a lot. So we don't see much of Buddhism in India nowadays. We do see a lot of Buddhism outside India. We see very strong Buddhism in Tibet, especially Tibet Buddhism is very much influenced by Tantra. Okay. So one thing of Buddha is that he did not write everything or anything. And therefore, when he passed, he left his physical body, there were a great difference of opinions between the monks, the bhikkhus. And because of that difference of opinion, then various branches of Buddhism were created. And we see that it's very divided nowadays, all these branches. Okay. All right. In this mantra, for example, is a very common mantra in Buddhism, Om Mani Padme Hum. It has its tantric influence. It's actually represents Hum, like this is the sound of Kundalini. So by just seeing this, we see the influence of Tantra in Buddhism. Okay, now a little bit about Tantra and Taoism. You know, Taoism was more developed in China, but what happened was that it was actually the tantric practice in the Himalayas, and then it is in the side of India, and then it's also in the side of China. Now in the side of China, it was Taoism, and even the word Tao is related to Tantra. And as I put there in the picture, that Tantra first, like, you know, words, depending on the geographical area and how it moves, they kind of change a little bit the sound. So Tantra became Tauta, Tawa, and finally Tao. And also, like, we hear a lot about Zen Buddhism, and we always associate Zen Buddhism with meditation. And actually, this Zen comes from a Sanskrit word of dhyan. Dhyan means meditation. It's a process of meditation in which one makes the mind flow towards the goal, towards the supreme. And from the word dhyan came chan, chen, and finally zen. So all these practices are very much related, and dhyan is a tantric practice of meditation. And another thing is one of the, in the history of the Tao, they talk about Fuxi, and there are some people and some indications that actually that was Shiva. And in China, he is credited with creating the human civilization. And as I mentioned to you, Shiva, basically, he systematized Tantra, he gave music, he gave dance, he gave also medicine, he gave system of marriage. So basically, he was the source of a lot of things that were very important for the creation of a real civilization that humans differentiated from just an animal-like life into human life. So there we can say that's when human civilization started, you know, when we left from an animal-like life to live a more human-like life. So there is also this tantric influence in Taoism. Okay, I'm coming close to concluding the presentation, so you can already think if you have questions, and you can prepare and already start typing. We'll come to that point very soon. So let's go to a summary. What I presented today. I know that I didn't approach it in the sense of Tantra was discovered in this time by this person, and I didn't go into all this way of giving you this history of Tantra, but I tried to mention the main personalities involved in the history of Tantra. With the first one, Shiva. We don't say everything started from Shiva. We could even say that, but there were practices. Shiva kind of made new and systematized, and so we can say he's kind of the father of Tantra. I also said that at the time of Shiva already, which is kind of 7,000 years ago, that's what I learned from my teacher. So at that time, Aryans were already coming into India, so there was already that clash or that conflict between Aryans with their Vedas and the locals with their Tantra, and that transformed the Veda, transformed the Tantra also. It came something new, you know, like a synthesis. And that was the time Shiva was kind of bringing these two civilizations together. And actually, Shiva was also quite recognized by the Aryans, as well as recognized by the locals, by the natives of India. So he was respected by both populations. So that was how this Indo-Aryan civilization came into being, the Vedas, how the Vedas were influenced by Tantra. You know, depending on how you read the Vedas, and if you have a tantric background, then you will see the Tantra within it. And that's the thing, like even in the Mahabharata, with a tantric knowledge, you see it in a different way. All right, I also said that Tantra influenced Hinduism, like Shankaracharya, one of the main exponents of Hinduism, he was much influenced by Tantra. Tantra also influenced Buddhism, and Buddhism influenced Tantra. So it's kind of a symbiosis there. And Jainism also was influenced by Tantra, and Jainism also influenced the way the external practice of Tantra was. But the internal, the deeper practice of Tantra, many of these practices are coming from Shiva. You know, even today, very important spiritual mantras and like these that are used in tantric practice are coming directly from Shiva, some directly from Krishna, but in between there were all these different movements in India, which were influenced and also influenced the way Tantra is practiced. So that's a little bit I shouldn't overlook. I also talked about Krishna. With Krishna, it's like 3,500 years ago. And he kind of revived the tantric practice given by Shiva in a different way. He gave a different, let's say, presentation of it. And that's because the people in the time of Shiva were a little bit less developed than the people in the time of Krishna. So therefore, the practice varies, and the way it is presented also varies. Let's say even today is, as I mentioned, okay, Krishna was 3,500 years ago. So 3,000 years after it's now, we are here, we are also different. So the way Tantra is practiced today is also a little bit different according to the time we are living. You know, it's a very different society today. All the technology and all the communication, and even like me here in Costa Rica presenting this class to you who are in different countries is, I would say, also something interesting, you know, that we can use this technology for that. All right, so that was that was the presentation. Let's go to the questions and answers. The first question I see here is, any overlap with Christ? You know, I grew up in Brazil. I was born there, and I was very much influenced by Christ. And there was a period I really read a lot about the New Testament, and there is a lot of the teachings of Christ are based on Tantra. So now we sometimes hear, and there is even a book saying that Christ was in India, and that period he disappeared. He basically went and he got his teachings, and then he came back and he was transmitting his teachings. And then even people say that he did not really die as we think he died, and then he went back to India like that. So there are all these things, but what the main point here is that analyzing his teachings, we see the elements of Tantra in it. And one interesting thing, and one of my questions when I used to read much about Christ, was that when he had his disciples and he taught his disciples and they all were elevated, means his disciples became from simple people to very spiritually elevated people who could also inspire many people into Christianity. And I connected that he must have taught them deeper practices of meditation and tantric practices that help them to transform themselves. Maybe there might be somewhere in time that these practices didn't get transmitted to us, let's say, like as I grew up going to church, and I means there was no kind of practice in that way. We used to pray and go to the church like that, but there was not really what I say that I could get a tantric practice from the priest. But yes, I didn't put in my history here the let's say the part of Christ, but just by analyzing his teachings and everything, we can see the tantric influence in it. I kept more on the side of India because there is where Tantra was more preserved, so I kind of kept on that side, so I didn't come so much outside. Okay, good. So it's good this question came and we talked about it also. It's another question coming up here is, Dadaji, in Shiva Tantra, when did Parvati come along, or is that the God story and not the great yogi story? No, actually, I didn't mention that part, but in Shiva's time, there were three main populations in India. The Aryans, the Mongolian race population, and the more Dravidian race population, which was darker skin, and the Aryans lighter skin, and the Mongolian race like the Asian Chinese, that area, Mongolian race. Shiva came in that time, there were these three populations, so he attempted to unite them also by getting married to three different wives, one from each different race. Of course, today we may think that, oh, but why one will marry three wives? It's not the custom today, but in those days, it was different, society was different. So it was perfectly accepted in the society. And Shiva did that so that he doesn't show a preference for one particular race. So he now brings in his marriage these three races together. So Parvati was the Aryan wife of Shiva. And she was also a spiritualist, and she was also a disciple of Shiva, and so she played a very important role also in the history of Tantra, because a part of the history of Tantra are the questions of Parvati to Shiva. So Parvati asks questions, she's kind of representing a human being asking the question, and Shiva is the tantric guru, tantric master giving the answer. So Shiva, excuse me. So Parvati is an important part of tantric history. Okay, and she was also a personality, a living individual, a living human being in this planet at the time of Shiva. Okay, here there is a question. Do you have suggestions for good books on the Vedas? Okay, I will research a little bit and send you some books. Of course, there is like the original Vedas that one can get with the translation, but that will be a lot of reading. And there are different interpretations and short, like my teacher, he gave a few short discourses about it, which is kind of a little bit condensed. And I will see if there's other things that you can get that is condensed. You don't have to go through all this, because in the Vedas there's a lot of things, and a lot of it is kind of, you have to distill it to find the essence, the spiritual essence. All right. Okay, we're coming to the end of our time. I see if I can get these few more questions here. How important are the Vedas for tantric practices? Well, for the practice, it's not that important that you get a knowledge of the Vedas, because the thing is like this: Tantra is very practical, and to learn practice, usually you need somebody who is practicing to kind of teach you, and in the books that you may find some of the practices there, but if you are a practitioner, you can find the practice there. If you are new, you may have difficulties to find it. So it's not so essential, the knowledge of the Vedas, for the practitioner of Tantra. It's kind of a side thing that could be interesting. And some of the tantric teachers, they have this, they already kind of took the important things from the Vedas and they kind of apply it. And therefore, when you learn the system, you can get it. Okay. All right. Okay, there are a few more questions here. We are kind of ending our window of time. I will make an effort to answer them via email, or maybe I could incorporate in some presentation in the future. All right, I just have a last thing. Is the question, if you have been practicing, Gustavo last time gave you a basic practice to practice the posture, meditation posture as a homework. So hope some of you are doing. I'm not going to ask you this to reply now. And you should have gotten an assessment form. And if we see that in the assessment that you already have your practice like this, we will not be sending you many things, but those people who will say, okay, I'm not practicing, I need something new, so we will send you your next meditation lesson. You can contact through the email tantrathoughts@gmail.com for these practice-related communication. And I think that's it for now. Thank you so much for attending this webinar on discovering the roots of Tantra. We'll be back next week. Gustavo will give another presentation, and then I will give one more in the end, and then you have an extra one that you get notified about very soon. And keep an eye on your email, because that's the way we communicate with you. Check if our emails don't go to your spam. Sometimes we send on a list. So nowadays, many things go to spam. So check, and if you see any of our emails in your spam, add that address to your address list so it doesn't go there anymore. So this much for now. These are our websites for more information. Thank you very much, and namaskar.